Green Bay is seeing a rise in the number of registered sex offenders who are not reporting where they live. Some of those sex offenders, in fact, are even homeless. And the state says it's a result of the city's residency restrictions. The Green Bay ordinance, now 4 years old, bans violent and child sex offenders from living within 2,000 feet of places like parks and schools. To live in the city, offenders must have the okay from the Sex Offender Residency Board. Tonight, Fox 11's Robert Hornacek is on special assignment with more on the impact of the ordinance.
We spent hours poring over data on the Sex Offender Registry to find out how well Green Bay's sex offender ordinance is working. The numbers show that fewer sex offenders are living in Green Bay, at least officially. In reality, no one really knows how many are in the city. In 2007, the Green Bay City Council decided to get tough on sex offenders by severely restricting where many of them could live. Supporters of the law wanted to keep dangerous offenders out of the city and in prison. The mayor wanted to reduce the concentration of sex offenders in Green Bay. After 4 years, that has happened, at least according to the online sex offender registry. According to Fox 11's analysis of the registry, in 2007, 68% of the 435 sex offenders in Brown County lived in the city. While the number of sex offenders in the county has risen in the last 4 years, the percentage living in Green Bay has dropped to 62%.
Look, we understand, and I think this whole community understands, that people have to live somewhere, and we just want to share that responsibility.
That's not to say sex offenders aren't moving into the city. In the last 4 years, 187 sex offenders have applied to live in Green Bay. The Sex Offender Residency Board has allowed 126 of those offenders to move in. 51 were denied, and 10 applications were withdrawn.
Every case is different.
Dean Gerondale serves on the Sex Offender Residency Board and says the ordinance is working.
Our #1 priority is to make sure that the citizens are safe, because that's why the board exists in the first place.
But that's not the whole story. The ordinance has also had some unintended consequences.
The impact that we have noticed is in regards to an increase in noncompliance.
Sex offender specialist Tom Smith says more sex offenders are not telling the state where they live. According to the Department of Corrections, the year the ordinance was passed, the state referred charges against 14 sex offenders in Brown County for not complying with the registry. That number has gone up each year. Last year, it went up to 41. 10 cases have been referred so far this year. Another 30 are under investigation. Another disturbing trend, according to Smith, is the rise in homeless sex offenders. He says there are as many as a dozen sex offenders in Green Bay with no residence.
When we no longer know where these people live, this is what we're dealing with. So definitely the protection of the public decreases when we're dealing with homeless and transient people, because we can't specifically put our finger on them as to where they are residing or living.
One of those sex offenders is Rob Tutt. Do you consider yourself homeless?
Pretty much. I don't have nowhere else. I don't have nowhere to go.
We interviewed Tutt at his girlfriend's house in Green Bay. In 2001, Tutt was convicted of second-degree sexual assault of a child for having sex with a 15-year-old girl. Tutt was 17. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison.
I'm not looking for sympathy at all. Like I said, I take full responsibility for my actions.
What Tutt is looking for is an official place to live. The Sex Offender Residency Board denied his request to move in with his girlfriend, although neighbors say he's been living there for a while. Tutt says now he moves from house to house and stays with friends. Every week, he checks in with the state to report where he's staying.
Yes, I'm a sex offender, and there's other sex offenders out there. They've probably been in the same predicament that I am. You know what I mean? Just because you're a sex offender don't mean that you're hardcore and you should be homeless. You know what I mean?
Alderman Jerry Wisbiski is one of just 2 aldermen who voted against the ordinance.
I'm not really for sex offenders, but I think everybody has a right for proper placement.
He says he knew the law would make it more difficult to keep track of sex offenders.
History before we actually did this proved that this most likely would happen, and I guess it looks to me like it is happening.
But overall, supporters say the ordinance is better than doing nothing.
Does it trouble you that there may be sex offenders living in the community we don't know about, that they're not registered anymore?
Well, I think there always were. I mean, you know, those things, yeah, they trouble me, that people aren't abiding by the law. I mean, that troubles me on a lot of different levels, but I do think what we're doing is having more benefits than not.
Green Bay was one of the first, but certainly not the last community to restrict where sex offenders can live. In fact, 16 of the 24 municipalities in Brown County have adopted restrictions on where sex offenders can live. For more detailed information on where sex offenders are living in our area, go to our website, fox11online.com. And if you have a story you'd like us to look into, email us at fox11onspecialassignment@WLUK.com.